Hi everyone, it's me, Tim, and today I want to talk about why there aren't more game developers doing channels like this. I've seen a lot of people ask or wonder in comments why there aren't a lot more channels with people who've made games doing this, and why I don't have more people on this channel. And I'm going to break those up. I'm going to talk about why there aren't channels like this. I'm also going to talk about why I haven't done more chats because they're related. And then I want to talk about kind of why it even took me 40 some years to do something like this. So, let's start with why you don't see other game developers doing it. There's a lot of thorny legal issues about what you can talk about, especially in a few years after a game comes out or a few years after you've worked at a company. These can be anything from NDAs to contracts to employment agreements. And some of these can be quite lengthy. Some of them may not have time constraints at all. Because of this, some people don't want to violate it. Even if no one will come after them. There's this fear that how I won't be able to get hired somewhere else if I start talking about these things. For some people, it's just the amount of time it takes. I mean, this is basically me filming myself as a talking head with very little editing and processing. But even then, scripting what I want to say, filming it, doing the light editing that I do usually at the beginning and the end, and sometimes to put up images and stuff, other videos, and then uploading it and getting it on to a channel, that takes time. And some of these people, after you spend all day working, you just don't want to do that. It takes time. There's also a commitment where people, once you start doing it, people expect it and they want it regularly. If you don't do it daily, they want it weekly. If you don't do it weekly, they want it every other week. And if you don't do it enough, you do start to get a lot of negative feedback on that. One reason people aren't doing it is the reason I didn't do it for so long, which I will talk about in more detail later, but just experience. You don't feel like, well, this is not the right time for me to talk about this. I haven't done this enough, or I haven't worked at enough places, or I haven't made enough different games to really have perspective on what's going on. And I commend that reason. And then there's negative comments. Now, I'll be honest, most of the comments on this channel are positive, and I love it, and I love you guys, and it's awesome. But there are negative comments, and everybody has to deal with that. I mean, I don't think there's a channel out there that doesn't get any kind of negative comments. And they fall into different groups. There are people who, they don't really watch the channel. They just seem to show up, say something snipey, and move on. They just like to stir things up, and you can kind of tell because I'm like, I've never seen that username before. You can click on them and see that they're not subbed, they've never commented on the channel before. They're just doing a drive-by sniping. But the things I don't get are people who watch my videos and don't seem to understand what I'm saying. Like literally don't understand it. And these come in all different forms. There are people who misunderstood what I said. It seems to be an honest misunderstanding. I said something, maybe it was a little vague. They thought I was saying something else, and they go off on a tangent about that. And then sometimes I post, well, that's not what I meant, or, well, that's one way of looking at it, but I don't think that's what happened here. But it's an honest mistake. Some people though assume things, and then once they've assumed that thing is true, they go off in this incredible orthogonal direction with that assumption. Like, well, Tim could have fired that person, or I don't think he understood what the other person was saying, or just things that's like, no, that's not why this problem happened. But, and I will sometimes say things like in my, the video about 5 videos I think you can learn from. So many people posted that as, this is Tim Kane's 5 favorite video games. I specifically say it's not. Or they say, I can't believe you mentioned Half-Life 2. I specifically put it in the extra section and said it's not an RPG. So it's not one of my top 5 RPGs because it's not an RPG. Or they say, I can't believe you didn't mention this or the other game. And I'm like, those games didn't come out in the 21st century. And I said, I'm going to talk about games that came out in the last 20 years or so. So there's a lot of things where people just make an assumption and then go off. The biggest thing, though, I've noticed is people have a lens, and I've talked about this before. They have a lens, and everything gets viewed through that lens. And everything I say that fits the lens, great. And then anything I say that opposes the lens, they throw away or conveniently forget or don't recognize in their comments, and then they go off on their own view of the world and somehow squeeze in something I said as a justification for it. So I can tell you that, like I said, I'm happy with the people who've decided I don't have enough experience. That's why I don't have a channel like this. And that's what I can say to some of the commenters too. If you don't have a lot of experience with something, this is probably a time to listen and not talk. I would be the exact same way decades ago. If a channel like this had existed, I'd be listening a lot. Now, if you have experience in that thing, in that area, and you want to talk about it, I love when people have different experiences. I want to say, well, this is what happened at my company, or this is how we solved that problem. That's great, and it's constructive. But don't get a whole lot of those. So let's move on to like why other developers... I'm not doing a lot of interviews. I've asked a lot of people. I'm not going to say who, because I don't want other people to feel bad. I've also not asked a lot of people. There are some people I simply don't care to talk to again. Now, the number one reason you're not seeing a lot more chats, though, is I don't want to make this an interview channel. That's not what it was supposed to be. It also makes it slightly less timeless. I'm hoping that in 5 or 10 years, this channel still has worth, where every time somebody wants to talk about, can you believe this company just did this, or you can believe this game just did this, it becomes slightly more rooted in right now, right here, on things people literally won't care about or even remember in 6 months. Now, some people I've asked to be on the channel have turned it down because they don't like public speaking. They never liked it. It's part of the reason they got in the game industry. They're introverted. They don't want to speak in public, and so they're not going to. It also kind of goes back to not liking the public response. So what I said earlier about getting negative responses, they're just like, why do I even want to open myself up to that? So some people have said, hey, I like what you're doing, but I'm not going to be on it because I don't have time in my life to be opened up to getting sniped at by random internet people. Some people didn't like their experiences in the game industry. So when I go to talk to them, they're like, yeah, I don't really want to dredge that up. I didn't like working on this game. I didn't like working at that company. And I just don't want to talk about it anymore. And there were people who didn't like working with me. And so they've said, yeah, I didn't really like working together. Or they don't even answer. Or they say something like, well, that wasn't a good experience for me. And I get that, and I respect that. There are people, like I've said, there are people I didn't like working with. So I haven't even asked them to be on the channel. But you can't expect everyone to like working with you. And even if what they didn't like has nothing to do with like your personality, it's just you want to do things this way and it's not how they want to do things. So they don't like working with you. And I get that. And so there's some of that as well. So this gets me into talking about, I wouldn't have done this channel even 10 years ago and for different reasons. I mean, I'll quickly walk through like the number of years I was in the industry and why I would not have made a channel. So after I was in the industry for 5 years, it would have been 1986. So aside from the fact that doing something like this would not have been possible on the internet then, I'd only worked at one company and I had one product shipped, Grand Slam Bridge. I don't even know how to play bridge. I did it because I knew how to code C. I was really good at doing the algorithms that the designer could describe to me for bidding and playing. But honestly, at that time, I would have gone, who am I to talk about this stuff? And I really don't think that this bridge game is going to define me. And it didn't. So doing it in 5 years would have been an odd channel. It would have been oddly focused. Doing it after 10 years in 1991, well, by then, I still only had that one product. I was working as a contractor on my second one, Bard's Tale Construction Set, at a company I wasn't working at, Interplay, but would go in on, once a week to go over the product. So that gave me a very limited view. I'd only been an employee at one company and a contractor for another. What did I still know? I'd been in the industry for 10 years. What did I know about game development? I knew enough to know that my view was limited, so I didn't want to do it. Jump forward 20 years. Now it's 2001. I just shipped Arcanum. So I had Bard's Tale at Interplay and Rags to Riches and Fallout. And I just finished in 2001 shipping Arcanum. So you'd think, okay, you've been in 20 years. The internet is mature enough to support videos. Why wouldn't you have done it then? And the reason was I knew enough 20 years into my career. I knew enough to know exactly what it was I didn't know. I was running a company and I was learning all the stuff you do not know as an employee, but I was learning it as an employer. And there was a ton of stuff I was learning I was bad at. There was a ton of stuff I was learning I didn't even know how it worked. So I would say 20 years in, I had become self-aware enough and knowledgeable enough to know exactly what it was I didn't know. So a channel then would have been, oh my God, here's all these things I don't know. Go 30 years in, 2011, okay, now I've got a lot of experience at things. I've made 3 games at Troika, shut down the company, worked at Carbine for 6 years, was now going to work at Obsidian, was working on my first PlayStation game on the PlayStation 3. That would have been South Park: The Stick of Truth. Okay, I've seen a lot. I would describe myself then as having that 1,000-yard stare that you see in war veterans. I'd seen a lot of stuff, and I was processing a lot of stuff. Doing a video at Video Channel in 2011 would have been horrific. I would have cast a lot of people in bad light. I would have told a ton of negative stories. I'm sure I would have scared everybody away from game development because I had seen it all. I had seen bad employees. I had seen bad employers. I had seen bad managers. I'd been seeing bad team members. I had seen bad support departments. I had seen bad publishers. I had seen bad press people. I had seen it all. And it was just like, so now jump forward 43 years later. It's 2024 now. Okay. Why can I do a channel now? Well, I started a year ago, but why? Why now? First of all, I've talked a lot about nuance. It took me a long time to get that, to not view everything in black and white, to not put everybody in a category of here's a hero, here's a villain. It took me a long time to realize here are people who are just doing their best, who are trying to figure things out in a world where there's a lot of people who think they know it all, which can be frustrating. There's a lot of people who don't know anything that are frustrating. There's people who are phoning it in, which are frustrating. There are people who are super passionate and get into everything 10 times more than everyone else, which is super frustrating. And I get that now. And while I'm not saying it would take everybody 40 some years to figure it out like it took me, I'm a little slow. It does take a while to gain that perspective. So I would say beware of anybody who's made one game who says, yeah, I understand how all this works. I'm going to give you my pearls of wisdom. They made one game. Similarly, if they've been in the industry for 5 years or even 10 years, I would question, how much have you seen? How many different people have you worked with? Different companies have you worked with? Different games have you shipped? Different genres of games have you shipped? Do you really have a good perspective on what's going on? So I'm not saying they don't have great input to what's going on. I'm just saying be a little wary of people who quickly jump to being an expert, because there's a lot of stuff to learn and the game industry is really complicated. So that's kind of my answer to a question no one has asked, but many people have talked about, which is why you don't see a lot of other game development channels, why you don't see a lot of other game developers on this channel, and why it took me so long to make this channel. So I hope that was interesting, and if not, you can find a new video tomorrow.